Hi everyone. Let's just wait for 2 more minutes as people come in. Great. I think it's 2 p.m. so we can start now. All right. So again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone um, watching over across the globe. So my name is Marco, and I'm a program support consultant at the CCAC Secretariat, and welcome to this CCAC's webinar for gender and transport, entitled "How Gender Can Help Drive SLCP Mitigation in the Transport Sector." So on behalf of the CCAC, we're really pleased to have our esteemed speakers today here from the UNEP and WRI. So without further ado, I will now turn over to my colleague Polash Das, who is a program management officer in the Sustainability Mobility Unit of the UNEP based in Nairobi. He is currently involved in the global projects related to electric buses and electric mobility in Asia and the Pacific region. So he will be our moderator for today. So over to you, Polash.
Thank you, Marco. And welcome everyone to this webinar, which I believe is on a very relevant topic. We have lined up excellent speakers who will be sharing their experience in promoting gender inclusion within the sustainable transportation ecosystem. So before that, I would like to invite Dana from CCAC, who is the gender focal point. Dana, could you briefly tell us about the webinar series that this session is a part of? Over to you.
Hello, yes, thank you very much, Polash. My name is Dana Krahal, and I'm the gender focal point in the Climate and Clean Air Coalition Secretariat here in Paris. And I won't speak up for very long because we have a great agenda today. But I wanted to kick us off with some context for this exciting webinar. Here in the CCAC and in the UN system, we recognize that climate change and air pollution are not gender neutral. So gender dynamics across countries and contexts really influence the ways in which people experience the impacts and solutions of short-lived climate pollutants. Here in the CCAC, we've been implementing our gender strategy since it was launched at COP27 to advance gender equality and the empowerment of women, and to ensure women are at the heart of SLCP solutions. To date, we have achieved some exciting key milestones, including gender mainstreaming across CCAC funding, which is an initiative we started in 2021, as well as integrating the OECD DAC 1 gender criteria into all of our project funding, including in the transport sector. We've also achieved gender parity on our scientific advisory panel. In reference to this webinar series, we've launched it to tackle gender inequities across SLCP sectors, breaking down key gender considerations and opportunities to develop better, more sustainable plans and policies in discussions with sector and gender experts, NGOs, and country partners. So in our last webinar, we took a deep dive into agriculture. We heard from the World Bank and ILRI on gender smart policies and tools for projects, and have since launched the Framework for Gender Responsive Livestock Development together with IFAD and FAO. And so today we're turning to transport, where we know that gender is a key consideration influencing mobility needs and patterns, as well as access to education, economic opportunities, and healthcare. We also know that gender impacts how people experience harmful air pollutants from the transport sector and the impacts of climate change that we see today. So as we advance our goals in this sector, including in the heavy-duty vehicles and engines hub, we really want to ensure that our solutions to sustainable transport are inclusive and provide opportunities to a diverse range of stakeholders, and that we're advancing gender equality objectives while we are also reducing short-lived climate pollutants towards a more sustainable world. So I'm very happy to hear some of the case studies today from colleagues in WRI and UNEP, which provide very needed practical examples on the gender and transport nexus, and very excited to continue to build this community of practice in the CCAC with all of you as well in the HDVE hub. So thank you very much, and I'm excited to hear the webinar today, and back to you, Palash.
Thank you, Dana, for letting us know the wonderful work CCS is doing in various different topics, and happy to know that gender aspect is right at the forefront. So, as I said, we have excellent excellent speakers on the topic. So let me invite our first speaker, Annika Berlin. She's a program management officer at the United Nations Environment Programme's Sustainable Mobility Unit based in Nairobi. She has set up and also leads the UNEP's Africa Support and Investment Platform, which supports countries in their effort to transition to electric mobility. So, and she also leads the UNEP's Global Working Group on Electric Two-Wheelers and Three-Wheelers and manages the Global Gender and E-Mobility projects. So today she will present UNEP's overall work on scaling up e-mobility projects globally with a focus on gender, and will also be sharing a case study on electric mobility and women in Bogota, Colombia. So before handing it over to Annika, I would request everybody to put their questions in the chat box, because at the end of each session, we'll have a 10-minute for Q&As. Over to you, Annika.
Thank you, Polash. Can you just confirm that you can see my slides in full screen mode?
Yes, I can see. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Thank you. I hope everybody else. Perfect. Okay, so yeah, hi everyone. Thanks a lot to Polash and CCAC and colleagues for setting up this webinar. It's a very timely occasion right now for us. As Polash said, we since over a year we have a global e-mobility program, which I'm going to speak to briefly, but we also now have a significant funding for gender work in this program, which we're very happy to have, because we always talk about gender as sort of a tagline in these projects, but without funding, of course, it's very difficult to implement concrete measures. So with funding from the German government through the Ministry for Economic Cooperation, the BMZ, we are implementing a project called E-Mobility as a Driver for Change towards the gender transformative and just transition to e-mobility. And this sort of links into our global e-mobility program that Polash has mentioned. So this is sort of the setup of the global program. We're supporting over 60 countries across low and middle income countries with the transition to e-mobility. What you can see here is that we have these regional support and investment platforms. Polash mentioned before that I'm at the moment coordinating the one for Africa, but we also have a platform in Asia coordinated by the Asian Development Bank, in Latin America and Caribbean, coordinated by the Centro de Movilidad Sostenible in Chile, and in Europe and Western Asia from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. We currently have about $130 million in grants and leveraging other funding from different entities, mainly from the Global Environmental Facility, but also from CCAC, the European Commission, other donors, and IEA. And yeah, this is just a quick overview of sort of the maps to see that, yeah, this is where we're all active. But since today's topic is on gender, I'm not going to spend much time on the details of the program, but dive right into the gender implications of this project, because many people will ask, what is now the link between gender and e-mobility? And here is sort of how the gender project links to the global project and to the country projects. So in all these around 60 country projects, they are all sort of gender tech, which means we have sort of targets to include women in the steering bodies for e-mobility, in the development of national policies and strategies, have certain quotas. Let's say 30% of participants of workshops have to be women. All the projects are supposed to collect their data disaggregated by gender, or at least sex. and that the strategies or the incentives that might be developed for e-mobility would consider specific needs of women. But of course, that's not as easy as said, and there's usually the countries don't have specific budget or gender expertise to do these sort of things, which is why this global gender project is very useful in developing tools and methodologies that can be used in the country projects, and also to establish a mechanism of learning between the countries and the regions, because we will see later there's some case studies where certain countries have already implemented gender transformative or sensitive measures, and that can be adopted by other countries. And that leads me to the term gender transformative. I think many of you here might sort of be even more familiar than I am with the gender terminology, but sort of what we have in the project concept is that all these projects are supposed to be gender sensitive, which means they acknowledge that there are different genders that might have different needs, but it doesn't go as far as also implementing measures that can change the current inequalities in the transport sector, which I think many of you familiar are well known. I will mention a few of them later, but sort of to see how we can now address causes of these gender differences and how e-mobility can be used as a driver for change, close to the title, so that we can sort of not only achieve the main goal of reducing CO2 emissions or short-lived air pollution or other emissions, but also achieving co-benefits just as gender equality and social inclusion, and having that sort of as a main outcome of these different projects. And I mean, this just what it says on the bottom, if we just introduce e-mobility as a new technology in the current system without sort of addressing any systematic issues, we were just changing one technology to the other, but we're sort of missing this big opportunity that is there right now to, again, address gender inequality across the transport sector. And to do this, the project has been set up as can be shown here. So we have 6 pilot countries that are Colombia, Ecuador in Latin America, Uganda and Kenya in Africa, and then Vietnam and Indonesia in Asia. And for all these projects, or for all these countries, we have now finalized what we call a gender and e-mobility country baseline study, which is basically focusing on the first barrier, that there's no data often disaggregated by gender in the transport sector. So we've analyzed sort of what are the modes of transport that women are using, in which occupations they're currently found, if there are any policies with regards to gender and e-mobility or transport, and what are sort of entry points for e-mobility. We're currently in the process of developing pilot projects that then could sort of target one of these issues. Pilot project, I mean, for example, a fleet of electric bicycles that are operated by women, which is an example I'm going to show later. And then, of course, the whole issue on skills. So how can we build the necessary skills for the condition, and global outreach partnerships. And that is the next one. And then also wrong direction. So how we have sort of structured the analysis. So it's structured in women as users, as workers, as entrepreneurs, and as decision makers, to have sort of a bit of a frame what are the different sort of entry points into the e-mobility sector for women. And I'm starting with the users, and because that's sort of what we all know often, that women have lower access to means of transport on the one side, because either they can be not allowed to use certain vehicles, often there are no driver licenses. They would like to use public transport when it's not available because they have different mobility patterns. They don't have a driver's license. So, and this is not going to change just with the transition to e-mobility, right? So that is why there has to be a sort of deliberate effort to change that. And we see that globally in most countries, women are higher users of public transport and other shared modes of transport. So if we improve these modes, for example, by making buses electric, formalizing the sector, having better accessibility in vehicles for women traveling with children, then of course we are improving their mobility needs. Same on the two-wheeler side. So in many countries in both Latin America, in both Asia and Africa, two-wheelers are used for public transportation. So of course, if with now newer and safer technologies, we can improve them, we are at the same time improving the mobility for women. And also, if we see an increase in vehicle ownership in general, so if if, for example, we can make EVs attractive, then women might rather choose electric vehicles over ICE vehicles as their first vehicle, because in some studies it's seen that women are more conscious about sustainability. And this, of course, will help to reduce the emissions of the transport sector further. Just one example from Vietnam, one of our country studies, where they have actually done analysis where it's actually seen that women are higher users of electric scooters in that sense. You can see the shares. And that, I think, was sort of promising to see. And then I move over to women as workers in the EV industry. So the shift to e-mobility, it's sort of a new industry, requires more new workers, new skills. So that presents an opportunity now for more women to take up these jobs. But for that, of course, they need the required skills, which we often find in fields that are usually more dominant by men, such as science, technology, mathematics, technician skills. So it's very important that sort of we have the skills development part of it. And e-mobility companies are often mentioning across the globe that they are lacking skilled workers, and women represent 50% of population. So it's, of course, a very big talent pool that would help these companies to recruit the staff that they need, and of course to advance the sector further. But it's challenging because there's often stereotypes among women not being good drivers or not being suitable for technician roles or engineering professions. So it's a bit of a big challenge to sort of work against these stereotypes, and also make the sector attractive for women, because, for example, a bus driver or a truck driver could be not so attractive for women because it's long driving. There might not be access, for example, to toilets. Breastfeeding could be an issue. So there's, of course, all these things that are very typical in the transport sector, making it less attractive for women to enter it. And now it's sort of a bit of a chance how we can address these. We see very promising case studies. For example, in Kenya, they are offering training specifically for women to become electric bus drivers or technicians. That's a new company working together with driving schools to offer these trainings and ensure. And we already see that the share in certain countries, for example, what in Colombia, that the share of women drivers in e-buses is higher than for traditional buses. So that's sort of a sort of promising development, because also the e-buses are much easier to drive. They are often newer, they are safer, and that, of course, makes it, and it's something new, so it makes it sort of more attractive than operating the older ones. And then another example is on electric motorcycles. This one is in Uganda, where through a project funded by EU, we have supported women to become electric motorcycle riders with an EV motorcycle company called Zembo. And that was sort of through the project, we were able to subsidize the training part of it and also lower the down payment, because often the vehicles are purchased through an asset financing company on a lease to own basis, which requires a small deposit, but often even the small deposit is not available for many women because they don't have access to the household finances or have any credit history that they can take loans. So through this program, we sort of lowered the upfront payment and allowed them to acquire the vehicle, learn driving, and now sort of earn income. And similar things we have done through a project called Solutions Plus in Rwanda. And based on that, we have developed a checklist on how to design a gender inclusive e-mobility training program, because there are many things that are important. For example, all the instructors men? Are men part of the training? Do women maybe feel intimidated if they're training together with men? Is there childcare for the women? What is the timing of the trainings? Does it match their other care responsibilities? So you have documented these learnings, and this is available online. Then we have looked at the role of women as entrepreneurs, and here there's, of course, as I said, new job opportunities. We see lots of startups that are now in the industry, and often we see that these startups are being founded by men. and often with leadership teams being men. And that is often because women in general across sectors have less access to financing. And in addition, e-mobility is seen as a sort of riskier investment in comparison to, for example, energy and agriculture. So that increases the barriers, especially as if women have, no credit history. So it's sort of both. It's on the funding company side, but also in using the vehicles to be their own entrepreneurs, for example, by in a delivery fleet or in a ride-hailing fleet. So it's very important that governments or investors promote, on the one side, female-owned businesses, put in place, for example, procurement guidelines that a certain share of procurement has to come from women-owned enterprises, or that the companies have certain shares or quotas of women in the workforce, or that the products are designed to address women needs, or that they're committed to having gender-sensitive policies, for example, childcare, maternity leave, separate bathrooms, and sort of those sort of things. And I wanted to pick up one example. This is a company called Wahoo Mobility, founded by a co-founder, a female Ghanaian lady. And we supported the company to expand their electric bicycle fleet from Ghana into Togo, where it's now run exclusively by women riders who use the bicycles to deliver food or products to households in Lomé, in the capital. And for that, I have a very short 1 minute and 30-second video where Jasmine tells us about the project.
Anika, there are no audio.
There's no audio?
No.
Okay, so it's working when we tested it. Of course, now it's not. Yeah. Let me reshare.
Yeah, probably.
Okay, let's give it one more try, and if it's not working, then we'll leave it. Can you see it?
Yes.
The Wahoo Women Delivers project is a collaborative work with the UNEP, which is geared towards empowering women in the delivery ecosystem. We find ourselves in a system where men are believed to be better suited for delivery jobs, but the Wahoo Women Delivers project is here to change that narrative. More reason why our focus is on women empowerment in the delivery region, to ensure that women are equally earning income for errands that they regularly do on a daily basis without necessarily having to use a bike. The Togo terrain is not one that is really known for e-bikes, and so it's really a good opportunity that Wahoo has introduced e-bike into Togo. And we are actually privileged and also love the idea of having women be our first riders in our Togo operations. Our plan for the future is to ensure that these women contribute to economic growth from riding the e-bikes as part of this project. And we also look forward to having our women in Togo and then in future across the globe at the forefront of discussions around delivery and the use of e-bikes in the African region and in the world at large.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So sorry, that was just a brief sort of snapshot of the project we've been doing in Togo, and I think this is a very promising results, because e-bike is sort of a new mode of transport that hasn't existed before. So there was no male e-bike delivery fleet in Lomé before, so everything was new: the bike, delivery fleet, and the sort of drivers. So it was a great opportunity to introduce women into the transport workforce in Togo, and I think it has great potential beyond that. And then the last angle that I wanted to mention, which is sort of, I feel, the most tricky one, is women in decision-making roles. And I mean, we see across the board that women are less represented in ministries of transport, in decision-making in companies. For example, I picked this figure from our report: less than 8% of all executives in the leading 20 automotive companies are women. Half of them lack women on the executive teams. In our Indonesian country report, they found similar: only 3 out of 4 people in decision-making positions are women in OEMs. And this potential shows now that with sort of new companies that are coming up on e-mobility, that from the beginning on, women can be sort of having equal share on these leadership boards. And also as UNEP in all the country projects, we're setting up e-mobility coordination bodies that are supposed to take decisions around, product development and e-mobility. And we explicitly ask or monitor that women are close to equally represented in these decision-making bodies. And we hope that this will translate also into future positions once the project is over, by the women on the one side gaining skills in the e-mobility sector, but also exposure and confidence with the sector they can work in. And just a general quote that women usually tend to focus more on sustainability, so that also is sort of more, let's say, opportunities to reduce emissions from sustainable products, such as electric vehicles. And yeah, that's what I picked Indonesia for this one. So here, just on the left side, you can see this is not for e-mobility, this is for Transjakarta, their bus rapid transit system, where there's a higher share or very low share of, as you can see, of 0.3% of women in management staff. And it's the goal of Transjakarta to move to electric buses. They already have quite a number. So that's and that's why I think it's also now interesting to see how gender equality can be improved. And I know that ITP and Transjakarta, ITP has supported Transjakarta, and they have very strong goals in improving the gender ratio. And I mean, similar on the side, you see it for the e-bus technicians and for the bus drivers. So there's still some work to do to increase the female participation in the workforce there. And that comes now to my last slide, because I know I've spoken a lot, and then I want to give the floor to WRI and questions. If this made you curious, so we have developed an international gender and mobility baseline report, which sort of a bit of a summary of the 6 country baseline reports that we have done in the countries that I've mentioned. It also includes a database of reports around the topic of where you can find certain data where it's available. And while the global report is online, the country reports will now be launched step by step. So we'll start next week. There's the Africa E-Mobility Week here in Nairobi, Kenya, where I'm based, where we will launch the country reports for Kenya and Uganda. And then we will launch the following country reports for Latin America and then for Asia. So I think by around November, they should all be out. And we hope that they provide sort of, a document of reference for e-mobility and gender in these countries. And based on that, as I said, we're developing a pilot project for each of the countries to sort of test some of the assumptions. And hopefully, through the work with people on the call and others, we can amplify these efforts and sort of move to a more transformative and just transition to e-mobility across the globe. And that's just the QR code to the report. We'll also post the link in the chat. And with that, thanks a lot for the attention, and back over to my colleague Polesh.
Thank you, Anika. This was very insightful. I'm sure everybody is waiting for the reports to be released out, and they will be. It will be very helpful to understand the things that are going on globally. I especially appreciate the kind of approach that has been taken for this report. Firstly, doing the baseline study, understanding what exactly the situation is, and also how the requirements has been categorized in various different categories, right? The user, the worker, entrepreneur. And congratulations for the exceptional report that will be coming out. There are a couple of questions. I do also have a question, but let me first take the question that is in the chat box, and I'll request everybody to put your questions in the chat box if there is any. So one question I do have is that when can we have a Caribbean pilot project specific on gender, on e-mobility? So Anika, do you have anything stored for the Caribbean islands or other islands?
Yeah, of course. So the Caribbean islands, we include them in the Latin America and Caribbean region, which I should be more explicit about. We actually have a couple of global environmental facility funded e-mobility projects in the Caribbean, including Antigua and Barbuda, St. Lucia, I will have to pull up now again. I put the link there, the thing. So they will all have e-mobility pilots. Yeah, Dominican Republic, Grenada, and Jamaica. So they will all have e-mobility pilot projects, and they should, in theory, all be gender inclusive. And I'm very happy to put you in contact with my colleague Luis Felipe, who's managing that region on behalf of UNEP, and you can maybe discuss rooms for collaboration in the region. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I also have a question specific in this on this topic. Is that you have a global understanding about various different countries, right? On this topic. So if I can ask you if you could pick two issues which are common globally that you think are the prime reason for low participation of women in electric mobility ecosystem. If you can pick any two.
Yeah, I think from what I've mentioned before, I think one issue is on the workforce side, that we see that many of these jobs that are more technical or engineering side, that there's sort of this global stereotype across the board that women are not suitable for this type of positions or don't have the required skills. And I think that's something that can be addressed, but it's also a long term. Like if we now change the curricula and incentivize more women to take up these fields, it will take time until they graduate from these positions and then can take up this work. And the other one is the user side that is often seen, for example, that women are not suitable as motorcycle riders or even as bicycle riders, which sort of also gives them less confidence of using these modes. And I think that's sort of a lost potential because limited mobility is an issue. I forgot the percentage now, but it's a very high number of women who actually cite access or lack of access to mobility as a reason for not taking up certain jobs because they're too far away and it would take them too long to get there. And at the same time, they still have to drop their children. So for example, if an electric bicycle now enables them to move much quicker, I think this is a great opportunity for them to have, a bigger span to access jobs. And I'm hoping that we can sort of break the stereotypes and have many, many women riding on electric bicycles across the world. But of course, that also needs safe infrastructure, which I'm very aware of. Living in Nairobi is not always given. So I think that also comes then government has to make sure that these modes can be used safely. Yeah,
absolutely agree to that kind of vision. We have another question from the case study. What do you think was the biggest pull for women to become part of the workforce and training?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think one is, of course, people want jobs. And if we see now that many of the mobility companies, since they often get support also from donors or much newer, they provide better employment conditions than maybe traditional, informal transport operator in low and middle income countries that don't have, maternity policies, that don't have, these quotas or like better policies on how to include women in the workforce. So we see that many of the e-mobility companies have policies that are better in that. So that makes it, of course, more attractive for women to enter the sector. And I think it's also a bit of an image issue because it's seen, transport was often seen as something, like bus, like more dirty or old school. I think there was a report also by the International Truck Association that they have like a huge shortage of truck drivers globally because it's just not really an attractive position. But now being sitting like a brand new electric bus, right, that's just came fresh and gets a lot of publicity and it's painted in green and sort of as the future, I think that's much more attractive for someone to look at a job for this sort of profession.
Totally agree. A related question on that in terms of building local capacity, what do you think that how best the local capacity be developed in terms of implementing gender responsive policies and programs?
So I think it's definitely a collaborative approach. So we, on the one side, often, we have the tendency to work with governments as a UN agency, but it's very important to work with the private sector as well to understand from the bottom up what are the needs of the private sector in terms of skills, and then bring in the academia, but not only like universities, vocational colleges to then develop a curriculum that matches the needs of the private companies and also ensure that there's at the same time opportunities for internships and on-the-job training to make sure that people not just graduate with certain skills and then cannot apply them right away. And the same applies to the policy area. So I think instead of like over politicizing this. It's good to have a stakeholder engagement mechanism, which we try to do to these e-mobility coordination bodies to see what is really needed from the private sector, that then the government can sort of provide an equal playing field across the different companies. And
Yes,
also
I
lead
have
by
an
example.
Sure, absolutely. I have an interesting question in the chat. Although UNEP, majorly focusing in low and middle income countries or the global south, but these issues are global, right? So, are any of these best practices that can be implemented in global north as well? Do you think so?
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. So actually, when we did the research on e-mobility, we found a lot of examples from Europe, and I mean, globally, only 19% of people in the transport workforce are women, and that is globally. So it means it includes majorly also Europe and US, where most of the data comes from, because we don't even have the data for most of, let's say, African countries. So these global figures usually are representative of the global north, because that's where the data is collected. And I think the same stereotypes persist there. Maybe not so much of that women should not use certain mobility modes, but definitely in the workforce in terms of engineering, leadership. So you will see in the report, many of the figures are global ones. For example, that only I think 2% of VC capital goes to female-owned businesses. Again, these are global figures. So I think most of the lessons learned would be applicable across the board. But we have these case studies in the countries to sort of go a bit more specific and see what is useful, because of course there are cultural differences between countries.
Okay, this is leading to very interesting discussion, but I'm also mindful about the time, so we'll take only two more questions, right? One is on the involvement of academia in these kind of work that you're doing. So do you think that there could be a strong requirement of more and more academic institutions coming into these kind of projects, especially in Global South?
So I think requirements are always difficult, because what leverage do you have to require? I think it's important to bring everybody. I mean, it sounds very platonic, but like bringing people on the table. So that's I'm saying, like having these coordination bodies or task force on e-mobility, where you will have people from the academia, from Ministry of Gender Affairs, from energy, from transport, from private sector, from NGOs. So that we make sure that sort of all these sort of needs and viewpoints are considered. And then as now is sort of this opportune time, because many countries right now are developing e-mobility strategies. They will include measures, and as UNEP, we always recommend that they would have measures, one on social issues, which would then include gender inclusion, and then of course all the other more technology or urban planning measures. So I think this is a good time now to bring in these various actors, because one strategy could be, for example, to revise the curriculum for electrical engineering to include the topic of batteries, and then could also be sort of giving maybe incentives for women to take up these positions at the university for reducing, for example, their admission fee.
Sure, thank you. So I'll take one more question. There is another question specifically for CCAC. Probably I'll ask Marco to address that at the end. But there is a question on women's safety as user of public transport considered in the project you presented. And do you think that having female bus drivers, for instance, can improve safety for female users?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Because I mean, that's I think I had it on the slide, but I didn't spell it out. The same, of course, applies also for taxi riders. Like many women are scared of using taxis at night because the driver could cause harm, or they don't know them. And on the other side, it creates jobs. And also in terms of the vehicle safety, as I said before, often now new vehicles come in and they are more digital. So for example, most of these electric vehicles with the batteries, they can be monitored. So you know always where the vehicle is, what's the state of charge. And that, of course, also then prevents theft, because theft is another issue that's very important in many places, where women feel they're more, easier to get the vehicle stolen. And because they are more connected, that's less of an issue. But we need to make sure that we provide, for example, lighting at charging stations, that in buses there have to be cameras and sort of safety measures at bus stops, at waiting stages of motorcycle riders. So I think there are infrastructure measures that have to be in place to ensure or improve safety for women, which is a very important topic.
Totally agree. Thank you, Anika. Let me now invite Azra Khan. Azra is a program manager at WRI, working on sustainable mobility solutions and gender responsive mobility planning for cities in India. She has been supporting more than 15 cities in developing and implementing sustainable and inclusive transport solution. And in the recent year, her work has been increasingly focused on the intersection of air quality, transport, and gender. And she's leading the Transport and Gender Initiative for the Clean Air Catalyst project in India, supports various other clean initiatives by WRI. So today she will be presenting WRI's overall work on transportation and the zero emission roadmap and mainstreaming gender in air quality and transport, and case study in integrating gender sensitivity in Indian cities. So over to you, Azra.
Thank you, Bulash. I'll just share my screen. Let me know if it's visible.
Sure. Yeah, I can see. You can put it in full screen, please. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for inviting me for this wonderful discussion. This is a subject which is very close to my heart. I've been working on this for a very long time now. So yeah, I get excited by conversations around gender and mobility. So today I'll talk about the different initiatives that we are taking at WRI India in mainstreaming gender and mobility, but I'll also talk about how we are taking this forward and also integrating that into clean air action. So a lot of cities are now working on reducing emissions from transport sector, which is one of the major contributing sectors to PM emissions across cities in India. So how we are extending this linkage between gender and mobility to clean air solutions also. So I'll talk about that. Just to give a context, I think a lot of people are aware of this, and this is nothing new for many countries. In globally, is also a large percentage of the population breathes, air which is below the WHO standards. And especially in Indian cities, transport is one of the major contributing sectors. Now, when we talk about transport, it is important to also understand who are the ones which are getting most impacted. So now there are several studies which show that men and women experience air pollution differently, and these could be due to various reasons, either due to some of the occupations where women are employed in large numbers, like in Indian cities, mostly street sweepers are women. Also because some of the roles in how the households function in Indian societies, like women take up mostly cooking, cleaning roles, which also often lead to them being more exposed to air pollution. Specifically looking also at mobility, how women travel. There are now studies globally which show that women's travel patterns differ greatly from that of men. Women are more dependent on public transport. They often travel with dependents, and they do something which is called trip chaining, which I think Anika was also mentioning, that they make multiple stops in a single trip. So which is not something which men do. Men make more direct trips. So there are studies which show that there's also difference not just in how women experience transport, but how they use the public transport in general, or the mobility choices that they make. There's another, just to reinforce that point, there was another, not study, but a data that was collected by the Indian government, which was called the Time Use Survey. And interestingly, when we looked at the data in detail, we saw that women across socioeconomic sectors spend a large amount of their time in unpaid domestic work, most majority of which is cooking and cleaning. And this is whether they are, this is across education levels, this is across social income levels. So just through this, we understand that, designing solutions which are like, overall solutions or bucket level solutions will not work, not just in case of mobility, but when you look at the impact of mobility, in terms of how women experience it, or in terms of the exposure that the transport sector has, there's a varying difference in that, in the levels of that. So what currently cities usually do is they either have free transport, or they either have female drivers for female passengers, or they are mostly technology-based solutions. So not saying that these solutions don't work, they do work in some cases, but what is needed for a more gender responsive mobility system is much more. You need more gender responsive policies, you need more gender responsive public transport planning, public spaces that are designed in a more gender responsive manner. All this collectively will lead to an ecosystem which responds to the needs of different genders within the system. So taking that into consideration at WRI, the approach that we are following is that of avoid, shift, and improve. So avoiding trips that are unnecessarily, by having compacted communities, compact land use, shifting to more sustainable modes of transport, and then improving through transition to cleaner fuels. So this is one of the approach that we are following. But in doing so, although the focus is on reducing emissions, but it's also, we're also focusing on reducing exclusion in the cities. So in reducing emissions or in designing solutions which reduce emissions, care should be taken that we are not excluding any communities or any gender, specifically women, from these solutions. And also the additional benefit is that of road safety, that when you have safer systems, when you have sustainable mobility, you also have safer roads that people use. So very briefly, I'll just skim through some of the interventions that we are taking, because there are multiple work that's been happening in India. I'll just talk very briefly, and if there are questions, then I can explain more. But firstly, there's this one project that we had worked in 2 cities in India, which looked at gender inclusive mobility planning in specifically bus systems in these 2 cities. So we worked with the public transport agencies, supported them in understanding how to collect gender disaggregate data and how to use that data in designing gender inclusive systems. So this was done in 2 cities, and the plan was adopted by the public transport agencies in both the cities in designing inclusive bus transport systems. There's another project where we are looking at women's as caregivers and their mobility needs. How do women who are primary caregivers, how do they travel? What are their travel needs? What are the spaces that they use? How do they experience different spaces? And how can those be designed in a more gender responsive way? So this is another project that we're taking up in, I think, more than 10 cities in India that's currently ongoing. This is one of the flagship project. I think if anyone of you have visited Delhi, you recognize the street. This is the famous Chandni Chowk street, which was recently transformed from a very jam-packed street to completely pedestrianized streets. And for doing this, the process that we followed was, completely gender responsive, right from consultations to design, how the street was designed, how the public spaces were designed, all that had a gender and equity component built into that. And you're most welcome to come and experience it. If you're in Delhi, please let us know. We'll be happy to, take you through and explain it to you, the various design elements of this. This is another project which we did with the Metro Corporation in Mumbai, because metros are coming up not just in bigger cities, but a lot of tier 2 cities are also designing and implementing metro systems. So it's important that from the start they understand the importance of gender inclusive planning in metro systems. So this is one project that we did in Mumbai, where again we did some sensitization with the agencies. We demonstrated how to collect gender sensitive data and how to incorporate that in the design of metro systems. So this was one. Now, these couple of projects are very recent. This one is related to electric mobility, where we are working with the central government in increasing women workforce participation in the transition to electric mobility. We know that there's a large push towards moving to electric, vehicles in different sectors, whether it's public transport, whether it's private transport. But it's important to look at this and ensure that this is a just transition that's taking place. So this project includes mapping what are the employment impacts of this transition, and also just leveraging this whole opportunity to see that if more jobs could be created for women and other marginalized communities. So this is one project that's ongoing. And this is one of the very recent projects. This was launched just last month only, where we will be working in 3 cities across India, which is Bangalore, Ahmedabad, and Kochi. And for this project, we will specifically engage with civil society organizations and training them in, designing gender responsive systems through a participatory approach at large. So this is one project which we will be starting now this month onwards. So this is happening. Now, taking all these experience in mobility, we have this case study that I'll focus on is a roadmap that we have developed for one of the Indian cities. In how do you take all these forward and how do you actually implement a system on ground which is gender responsive? So we have come up with a roadmap of gender inclusive or gender responsive cleaner actions for the city, which is targeted towards transport. So I'll briefly explain the process that we followed. So this is one of the projects that we are working in a city called Indore in India. And there are 2 other geographies where we are doing a similar project. One is Jakarta and other is Nairobi. The approach for this project has been one, we started with creating awareness around various sources of pollution. Then we identified the most impactful solution for that particular city and the communities that were impacted most by the air pollution. And then lastly, building a coalition, bringing different stakeholders together and making sure that their needs are not just heard, but implementing agencies and authorities also act upon those needs when they are designing and implementing solutions. So this is the aspect that I'll focus on now. So for this particular project, we focused on transport sector. And the approach that we followed was to look at the root cause of the problem. So not just looking at transport as a whole, or looking at large chunk of problems like public transport, connectivity to public transport is an issue, or access to public transport is an issue, or congestion is an issue in the city. But actually breaking that problem into many, many parts and understanding what is the root cause and then designing a solution for that. We also looked at which are the communities that are getting mostly impacted by transport in the city. So whether it's women, but women, where are these women employed? Where are these women living? Whether it's low-income communities, what are their travel patterns? Where are they placed within the city? So understanding that whole ecosystem of who is more impacted and where are they placed within the city. So for doing that, this is a 5-year-long project and we are currently in the 4th year of the project. So for past 3.5 years, we've been engaging with multiple stakeholders, whether it's like, health sector, different implementing agencies, students, academic institutes, even journalists and medical professionals, to not just make them aware about these issues, but also take into consideration their inputs in designing solutions for the city. So just to give you an example, we designed based on the different assessments that were done. The main solution for Indore was that we need to move from private transport to public transport. And the target was that 50% of all trips need to be made by public transport by 2040. But what does it mean when we look at it from a gender inclusivity lens? When we talk about public transport, it needs to have subsidies for women caregivers. It needs to have real-time information. The access needs to be designed in a manner that more and more people are able to use that. So we designed this whole, the solutions were redesigned or, repackaged in a gender inclusive manner. And for the city to be able to act on it, we designed a roadmap, which we called a gender responsive roadmap for the city. For doing that, we started with something which we call the Indore Clean Air Coalition. So this is a forum where we have brought in people from different sectors who are impacted by transport emissions, by air pollution, and who have different needs that they want to communicate. So it includes implementing agencies because they are the ones who will implement the solutions. It includes community and civil society organizations, academia, students, again, media personals, subject matter experts, everyone who is a part of the city and who has a say, who needs to have a say in how the solutions are designed. So all these people have been brought up to a single platform. This is a picture of the mayor who's launching the coalition. It was launched in July this year. So through this coalition, we are not just bringing these different people from the different sectors together, but we're also bringing women from these sectors at the forefront. So we are training women from all these sectors, so from health sector, from from academia, even from government offices. There are very few women who are there in decision-making roles when you look at Indian cities, but identifying them, even if they're in technical roles, identifying them and training them to become clean air champions has been one of the key work that we've been doing as a part of this project. And just very briefly, this is the roadmap that we have designed for the city. This is, of course, like, at an overarching level, we'll be submitting a report to the city, which will have details at each of these stages. But this just gives city a snapshot on, what are the steps that you need to follow. And at each and every step, there has to be a gender responsive approach, and it cannot be just technically one-sided approach or a gender neutral approach that could be taken, because a lot of times what happens is when you talk about transport, there's a very direct approach that the city wants to take, and implementing authorities have a very unidirectional way of looking at the problem. So just making sure that right from the framework to feedback mechanism, everywhere gender is mainstreamed in the entire process. And I'll just end with this slide. I think I did not take too much of time, but I just end with this slide that, why do we need gender mobility in the cities? I think this is a win-win situation for everyone. Gender responsive mobility will definitely ensure that more women have access to jobs, healthcare opportunities, and a gender inclusive and a safer system, which is designed for women, is safe for all. It's safe for children, it's safe for elderly. Everyone can use that system. And that in the long term will lead to increased ridership for public transport. So just understanding that's this very simple, flow chart of how things would work in a city if you have a gender inclusive approach to mobility systems and now to clean air also. So yeah, I'll end with this. If anyone is more interested, this is one of the reports that we have done with USAID, and it gives you a structure in the form of research questions. So if you're working in a city in the space of gender and mobility and vehicle emissions, what are the questions that you need to ask, and how you could engage with different stakeholders in getting answers to those questions. So if anyone is interested, I don't have just the link, but if you search on it on the internet, you should be able to find it very easily. So yeah, I'll stop here. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Azra. This was very insightful, and you touched upon various different aspects of gender inclusivity and great examples from India. I have a couple of questions along with that. Okay, so one question is that what are the challenges that you encountered by implementing these projects back in India?
I think, yeah, one of the main challenges is the level of sensitivity among the government officials when it comes to gender inclusive planning. So it's very unidirectional. When you talk about gender inclusive mobility, they immediately think of, women only buses. They immediately think of, designated seating for women in the buses. That's where their understanding stops. So the main challenge is to make them look beyond these traditional solutions for women, and just to open their thinking in looking at it in an overarching manner, making sure that the gender is mainstream in the entire process, and it's not just the segregation based solutions, but it's much more than that. So that has been the main challenge.
Totally agree to that. Another question, according to your best practices, what is the good idea to change the perception of considering that women should stay at home, taking care of children and household, and promote women inclusion mainly in the transport sector? So this is specifically from Cambodia, is a small percentage of women as a driver, especially in the public transport. So this has been a thought everywhere, especially in northern India, I would say, where not many women are being allowed to join the workforce. So how to change that perception?
I think a lot of the change would come with the infrastructure that is being planned around these kind of jobs. So it's not just employing these women, but then also needs to be steps to retain these women in the jobs. Because even in Indore, we saw that, a lot of women join these jobs, but they drop out after a couple of months because they don't have the supporting infrastructure, like, whether it's restrooms, whether it's washrooms, whether it's, childcare rooms, maternity leave. So all these things, once they are built in how these authorities recruit women, their employment targets, that's when we'll see more women. Otherwise, just setting a target that we need 50% more women, and then we start just recruiting without providing them any supporting infrastructure, that's not going to work.
Totally agree. Just one more question before I hand it over to Marco. That you gave a good example about how planning plays an important role when gender inclusive initiatives are put right at the beginning of the planning, and Chandni Chowk was one good example. And I can see that many cities in India are planning their next city roadmap, right, where they are planning urban transportation and other aspect of it. So do you think that this is one important aspect that should get into city planning and town planning initiatives that the cities are taking?
Oh, absolutely, yes. So I think town planning, the master plans, these kind of plans, they need to actually start looking at gender inclusive planning, because that's where the whole land allocation starts. How much land is getting allocated for different uses, where different facilities will come up in place. So this is definitely, I couldn't agree more. And that's why in this coalition that we are doing in Indore, we have made sure that the town country planning officials, the development authority officials are a part of it. A lot of the times they come up and say that what is our role in, designing transport systems, or how do we do gender responsive planning. But it's important they're a part of these conversations so that, they understand the importance of, ensuring that the urban planning in itself is gender responsive. So yeah.
Great, great. So just to let everybody know that India also has a Jeff project, which is just getting in shape, and gender component is also one of the component that we'll be looking at probably, and also WR India is the executing agency in India. Probably we can absorb few of these inputs in the Jeff project, and then probably we can implement. So thank you so much, Azra. Back to Marco for the closing remarks. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Palash, Azra, and Anika. So to close it, I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone, of course, for attending this webinar. We're really happy to have these speakers here today and promote these best practices through the CCAC funding directly to countries through our expression of interest process, and also considering, of course, gender component in that. I would also encourage all to request targeted expert assistance if you need to, and or TA funding related to gender uh, considerations. So again, as we've seen, UNEP and WR have shown this strong leadership and proactive work in mainstreaming gender in the transport sector to address air quality and climate issues. It's also great to be a part of the launch of UNEP's new international baseline report on gender and e-mobility, and showcase the development of low emission zone roadmaps by the WRI. But more than that, I think I've also appreciated the fact that we've learned so much about the different success stories through case studies in across different countries and regions in Asia, in Africa, and the Pacific, so which can be a good way to replicate in different parts of the world as well. So, but finally, we would like to encourage everyone to again seek technical assistance or any help in relation to gender mainstreaming in your countries and projects, especially in the transport sector. And we will be posting the recording of this event on the website. So if you need to go back to it or see what are the lessons you've learned from this webinar, hopefully a lot, so you can just go back and listen once again. So finally, thank you so much to Anika, to Azra, Palash, and Dana for taking the time to participate in this webinar, and for everyone who has joined us today. Again, thank you so much and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. All right.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for organizing.